And I feel that one of the next movements will be moving from this thought of intention is really important to perception. So moving from intentional to perceptional way of being, because an intention implies a me or a self that has an intention that is projecting that, whereas perceptional acknowledges that we have a light that sees behind our eyes, and we will act based on what the moment shows us, not on our projected intention that we're holding on to. There's nothing to hold on to. Nothing. But that's the thing we often do, is try to hold on to good things, good patterns instead of bad. We don't know what good and bad is. And for some reason, I had an insight into the fact that we're driving our bodies, or our bodies are being driven under the influence of thought and programs and patterns and conditioned reflexes. And this consciousness level of operating based on thought one day might be seen as the equivalent of walking around intoxicated, because we're intoxicated by ourselves. We're addicted to ourselves and our own projected pleasures, and operating based on that, which isn't the only way to operate. Perception of the actual moment drives out thought. So if we're awestruck in a moment, we're not thinking. It drives out the self. So beauty is something that drives out the self, and it's a different driver that drives us. So being able to be with beauty and perceive it is really imperative. So my heart palpitation-y things could be a perception of the actual and a reminder of the danger of thought. So my heart beats, which is perceiving something actual, but if thought comes in and says, this is a symptom, you're in danger, that movement of thought is the danger, not the heart beating a little bit funny. So if I try to act based on thought, which is fear of the heartbeat, then I'm acting on something that isn't actual. Whereas if I say, take something like more amino acids, or seemingly this gesture of wearing my heart rate monitor chest strap seems to work. I'm not sure why, but it seems to be a gesture of hugging my heart and putting some touch on that chakra area. Some pressure of some kind. It reminds me a little bit of how Temple Grandin created the squeeze machine to simulate hugs, because she wasn't comfortable with human hugs because she had a label, or has a label, of autism. And later she was more comfortable with human hugs. But anyways, the squeeze machine, she needed touch, but not the touch of another human being for whatever reason. So maybe I do need the touch of another human being, but I don't have one. So I use the heart rate monitor chest strap, and that's a way to simulate touch there, and it seems to help. It's a gesture of that. Just like wearing this earthing shoe attachment on my foot is a gesture of touching the earth. And it's hard to calculate the meaning or the significance of that. We don't really know that. That's the unknown. I could say, oh, I'm putting this many electrons into my body by touching the earth with this foot thing. And that could have antioxidant effects. But we don't know about the gesture of being in touch with the earth, of a human being perceiving the necessity of that, or the possibilities of that, or opening it up to the earth to have an equal and opposite action upon us. A gesture of wanting to touch the earth, and then the earth energy touching us in return. Because so much of what is happening is because we're out of touch. We're not touching. Our brain cells are touching our images and holographic sounds that are on repeat. And that's not in touch with this moment. We're out of touch with the moment. But being in touch with the moment is very challenging. That's what I'm sensing. It's really challenging. It's hard to know what is coming from where. So if I'm not a separate self, what am I? Am I a field of possibility? And one thing I'm not sure about with this whole fat for fuel thing, and there's a bit of a paradox in focusing on material health and the fact that consciousness is more fundamental and organizes the material health. So some people that are really materially healthy still will manifest some kind of illness. So consciousness is still primary. But in saying that too, when one doesn't have an ego self-defense operating system as much, one becomes susceptible to taking on energies of other people, which can manifest as physical illness in the body of another. And that's part of what is happening that we don't realize, that we're creating physical diseases in each other by the way that we interact and the meanings that we've subscribed to, or that have been scribed on our brain, written on our brain, overwritten on our brain. And then when that overwriting turns to inciting, we're categorized as insane. So map consciousness is quantum seeing. We see how we're entangled and inseparable, and in that way it's hard not to feel responsible for other people and the whole world. And then the weight and the gravity of that feels heavy. So I'm not sure if this gravity is the ego self coming back or more of it collapsing, because there's a heaviness of feeling more responsible, and with the ego separation comes the feeling of being less responsible. It comes with a feeling of feeling responsible for only oneself and one's little life. So this is the feeling of the gravity, of the heaviness, of the ego coming back online by necessity, because as the feeling of responsibility goes up and there's not enough power in the epigenetic matrix to take on that responsibility, then it kind of crushes the nervous system of the one who is moving into the non-self algorithm, as they're not in a position to take on that responsibility. So it's this paradoxical movement. It really is. It's really fascinating. As soon as one starts seeing it one way, it reverses, and one sees it's happening the other way. And as soon as one feels like I need to help others, and one feels like I need to help myself, I can only gesture towards myself. It's this movement. It's this wave. But the thing is that there is no division between self and other. So that's where that resolves. So any action towards the self is an action toward another. And any action toward another is an action towards the self. It's an equal and opposite. So if I reach out to another, it's the same as if I reach out to myself. The brain doesn't know the difference. So from my perspective, I feel like I will choose a path of mastery of this being, because I honestly don't feel like most people want to master their energy the way that I would, which is a pretty anal retentive way. It's almost like feeling like if one is anally retentively healthy, that somehow makes up for people that really don't give a crap about their body. And one could go out there and preach that anal retentive healthiness, or one could go do it themselves. But the thing is, in doing it oneself, it does transfer to other people. So again, it's not an either or, it's a both and. So again comes that feeling of responsibility. We're not separate, so every little gesture ripples outward. Even right now, I'm not sitting up as straight as I could. And that affects the whole reality. And I was reading an article by Dr. Mercola about EMF and how on flights, people are exposed to gamma rays, gamma radiation. And I was thinking about how there's gamma waves in the brain, and I don't know if they're the same type of wave, but the brain doesn't operate much with gamma at this point. But if one takes this gamma phenomenon and extrapolates it to 30,000 feet, when one's brain is operating in gamma, one is really seeing the world from 30,000 feet, because that's where those gamma rays are, in the stratosphere. And I'm not saying that's necessarily a one-to-one relationship. It's just an interesting thing that popped into my mind when reading about the dangerous gamma radiation at 35,000 feet in an airplane. Maybe gamma waves are 30,000 foot view consciousness. And seeing from that vantage point, we can act creatively because we can see the whole thing. Can we see how we are this whole thing that we can see? We can see it because we are it. It's really boggling my mind lately. So yeah, it might be good to attempt to talk about some insights again, like I am. I wrote them down and printed them out so I could talk about them at the park. Because otherwise, there might be a buildup of this energy of an allostatic load of not speaking what I see in daily life. If I'm speaking what I do and not what I see, then I'm not allowing that flow of perception, which I did a lot of in reference to mental health, but can I continue that with these subtle intimations that are entering this consciousness? And I've talked about how part of the role of this type of consciousness and brain is to harvest these meanings and insights and share them, to make meaning, to create with perception. So I do feel I need to continue to do that and probably change my mind tomorrow, because I'll forget. Can't remember anything. That was funny, actually. I was editing the two videos and the first one ended when I got a phone call, and by the next video I was like, I have no idea what I was talking about. And then when I was editing, I was talking about how it felt when my heart palpitation happened, and just about to describe going through this wall of water into another reality, and then it cut off, and then I got that phone call and that's why it cut off. And then by the time a minute later, I was like, what was I talking about? But I had it on video, so I thought that was funny. I won't go into that little story more, but I really can't remember anything.